Welcome to the Raising Empowered Kids interview series. Today, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, menstruation, and celebrating a girl's first period. Barbara Hannalore is here with me. She's an award-winning author, speaker, and mentor, helping women reconnect with the rhythms of nature as a feminine way of power. She has been sharing a new paradigm for the menstrual cycle through the gifts of nature, the sacred space, and the healing arts for over 20 years. She is the founder of Women's Way Moon Cycles and author of The Moon and You, A Woman's Guide to an Easier Monthly Cycle. Her recently completed Mother's Moon Kit guides mothers in preparing for their daughter's coming of age. Many years ago, Barbara realized that we were entirely missing the gifts that our cycles have for us, and she invites you to join her for a creative rediscovery of this inner wisdom. And it's so true. Barbara, thank you so much for doing this work. I think that this is amazing and so important and needed. Hi, Barbara. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
I'm so glad to be here. This is so special, Robin, and I just love being part of this wonderful group.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got started talking about menstruation and celebrating a girl's first menstruation?
It was a gradual process as I became more aware of the whole different approach there was to menstruation, and that there had been this different approach throughout history and in different cultures that was much more respectful. And I think it all came together when I met Tamara Slayton, who was up in the Bay Area. I was taking an expressive arts training up in Santa Rosa with Natalie Rogers, and I encountered Tamara Slayton, and she had this little ad in the newspaper. This was in the early 90s, so this was almost 30 years ago. And she had this little ad in the newspaper called the Menstrual Health Foundation. And I thought, well, that's bold, you know. And 30 years ago, it was very bold to talk about menstruation openly like that. And so I went over there to her office, and I walked into her office. It was this beautiful high-ceiling faux painted office with these fascinating books, and she was creating cloth menstrual pads in the other room with this whole team of people. And she was, it took me a while to figure out, she was a lot engaged with the Waldorf schools and was able to give these coming of age events because she had girls in Waldorf, and she actually went around the country doing this. And I was just so fascinated because I had always wanted to be a teacher, and I had never found anything I really wanted to teach besides preschool and kindergarten, because that's all about nature and art, which is what I love, you know. And so but this work brought together nature and art and the sacred aspects of life and holistic health, and it just brought together everything I loved. And so I jumped in and studied her program and started, her program was kind of three-faceted like mine is, with the coming of age, the women's cycles, and menopause. And I have ever since done a bit of each.
Cool. Yeah, and it's, you know, for women, we have like these big hormonal shifts in our life. The first one is puberty. The second one is pregnancy. And then the third one is menopause. And, you know, I'm experiencing the third one right now. Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. And it really just kind of like brings me back to like, you know, like when I was a teenager and all of those changes that my body was going through. And you know, it's like I'm very aware of it now, but, you know, back then I wasn't. And, you know, for parents, you know, witnessing their children going through these hormonal shifts and stuff, it can be challenging. I know I was a bit of a handful around 13, 14.
Yeah. Well, it is very challenging. And, you know, part of my approach is just how can I make this an easier conversation for parents? Because I look at, I have appreciated over the years realizing that there are still moms that don't know what to say, and really don't say anything because they don't know what to say. And I think, well, that's probably because they look back in their own history and they can't really find much to draw on that's
Mhm.
positive or comfortable because their moms didn't know what to say. So we're just left with such a blank spot in the culture. You know, the culture that it's been said that the culture, what the cultural approach to first menstruation should be called the wrongs of passage instead of the rites of passage, because it's a message. There's a message of silence.
Mhm.
There's a message of shame. And, you know, the silence that addresses first menstruation in modern culture is a message. And it's a message that this is totally insignificant. And then another big message that girls get is that they should hide it. Like, here's how to hide it. Okay, you got your first period. Here's how to hide it.
Right.
And and then there's a lot of shame around it, and girls feel like their bodies have betrayed them because their bodies are doing these things they can't control. So especially because we've never been told anything positive about menstruation when you think of it, which is just so astonishing. No wonder parents have a hard time pulling together something positive to present to their daughter. And so I've tried to come up with just some basic concepts, you know, bringing beauty to it in any way I can, connecting it to the rhythms of the moon, which is huge because our menstrual cycle is very similar to the rhythm of the moon. And there's a lot of significance in that can help us balance our lives. And then to create some kind of passage that creates some kind of positive memory for a girl, even if it's very simple. I mean, you could hand her a red rose. You know, it can be very simple, but something to acknowledge the passage in a positive way is nice if you're fortunate enough that she tells you, which she may not. But everything that a mom or a parent does, a mom, you know, to review her own history, review her own coming of age, review her own approach to her menstrual cycle. All of these things will affect the daughter even in unspoken ways, even if when the daughter comes of age, the mom doesn't get to do the things that she would like to do.
And I think too, if moms have, our parents, because I know there are definitely single dads out there too who, have this responsibility also to, educate their daughters about this.
Yeah.
I think if we're having the conversation at a young age, that helps to open up the door for when it actually does happen, as it being something that's okay and to be celebrated and that kind of thing. Like, what age do you think, parents should start talking to their girls about menstruation?
You know, I love just thinking of it as an ongoing conversation. And I say with my Mother's Moon kit, which is a kit I put together with as many resources as I could think of to support moms in this conversation. And, you know, I say moms because, as I said, I address a lot of my work toward moms and their own approach to their own menstrual cycle. But as you said, there are dads who have this responsibility, and I'm so grateful that you know, there are many dads that step up and do really well. And I think that starting at a young age, having it be a continual conversation, because I know it's like with this conversation or with the conversation about sex or other conversations, it's like you don't want to be awkward and you want to pick the right moment, but that moment can maybe not come. And so you can keep putting it off. And so having the conversation in small bits. And what I love about relating the menstrual cycle to the moon is that it's just so natural, and the moon is something that most of us love. When you start talking to young girls about the moon, it's a rhythm of nature, and then you can observe how the similar rhythms of nature are everywhere with the seasons and with day and night, and that's just kind of how nature works. And then that women have a rhythm of nature within us that works in a similar way. And I could talk a bit more about that. That's what my book is about. But
Sure.
I created the Mother's Moon Kit for preparing your daughter's coming of age, and I suggest that it's for girls ages 8 and up. But you know, when you start just talking to girls about the moon, that can start at any age. So that's what I love about it, just to have the conversation kind of progress that way.
Yeah, that's great. I think it really helps too, like when you like plant the seed for something at a young age, and then you can continually just build on that, concept or that theme
Yeah.
as they get older and introduce, new topics when appropriate and that kind of thing. So I really love that idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about how you see, because, I remember when I was growing up, it's like the movies in the 80s, is like the curse, the rag, it's like lots of negative messaging and that kind of thing around menstruation. And I remember, like watching TV with my brothers or my dad in the room and like have a tampon commercial come up and just like feeling mortified, kind of thing. And just like all of these different things. So if we want to like shift how we perceive and think about menstruation, can you like give us like some of your thoughts around that and different ways that we can look at it and hold it?
Yes, yes, that's like my main message is the menstrual cycle has a lot of value for women. And when you think about that, we've been trained in modern culture to speak of our cycles as either a big drag or a joke. And that's sort of it. Those are the choices we have when we look around, and that's how it, when it is mentioned, that's how it's mentioned in the media usually. Here's how to hide it, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
But I've learned that it was regarded with great respect as being a rhythm of nature, and that the rhythms of nature have balance. So I'll show you in my book. My book is called The Moon and You, A Woman's Guide to an Easier Cycle. So you can see here that I'm relating women's cycles with the moon, and I'll show you um, in chapter 1. I started out chapter 1, what is a cycle? Because that's the nutshell thing of what I love to share with women is that, of course, our menstrual cycle goes on all month long, and there's a significance to every phase. So we've got the 28 days of the moon here. And then let me see, this is the one that shows it with the seasons around the cycle also. So when you take the 28 days of the moon, you can overlay any other cycle onto this diagram and see the similarities, which is so great. So you can see the seasons kind of follow that same rhythm, of course. But then over here on this other page, I've got it with the menstrual cycle. Here it is. So with the menstrual cycle, so it doesn't mean that you're going to be menstruating at the dark of the moon, but you've got menstruation down there because that's your personal dark moon. And then ovulation at the top is like your personal full moon.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, we can just consider, as we know, of course, when we think about it, that our menstrual cycle goes on all month long. And we've got this half of the month after menstruation would be like our personal springtime and summer, where our energy is kind of expanding outward till we get to our ovulation time, which is kind of like full moon, which is all radiant and social, extended outward, focused on other people. And the whole other half of the month after that, the light is waning and our energy is naturally drawing back toward ourselves. And the purpose of that is to catch up with ourselves, take care of ourselves, review the month. And also in terms of health, this just gives us the time to evaluate what's working and what's not so we can keep our health in balance. I mean, that's what the autumn season corresponds with our premenstrual time. And that's what the autumn season is about. It's about harvest and completion before the new cycle begins.
Mm-hmm.
So when we start considering our month like that, when we come out of our menstrual time into our personal springtime of sort of new energy, we can anticipate that 2 or 3 weeks from now, we're not going to be feeling the way we are right now. And so we don't pretend like we are or expect ourselves to. That's where so much of the challenge comes. Like you get to your premenstrual time, you've packed your calendar full of activity, just like with every other week of the month. You're doing your best to plow through as if nothing's happening and ignore your cycle completely, because we've been taught that any acknowledgement of it is a weakness. So of course we're irritable.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can learn these changes can happen so quickly for women, that if we can learn to anticipate that the maybe 2 weeks from now we're going to be feeling in a different phase that might be a little slower, if we can learn to take time for ourselves, even in small ways, to do things that are fulfilling, to do more creative things during that time of month, the whole month starts to take on a different tone. And it's not only helpful for us health-wise, but we feel this sense of self-respect because we're paying attention to ourselves and our own needs.
Yes.
Yeah. And so when we can just, again, we can present this to girls by talking about the moon. That's a great kind of introduction to it.
Definitely. And I think there's a lot to be said also with, trying to live in harmony with your cycle because like you said, our energy levels do ebb and flow. And, back when I was in my 20s and stuff, my first day of my period used to be a pretty rough day, a lot of cramps and this kind of stuff. And so I just would be like, okay, this is my day where I'm just like shutting down. It's like I tracked my cycle, which for me in my early 20s, like I didn't want to be on the pill anymore. When I was like 19, I was just like, I don't want to be on the pill anymore. And I didn't know what to do to protect myself from
Yeah.
getting pregnant. And it like led to this whole, journey of self-discovery. And I, discovered that my hormones are like doing this incredible dance. And like every month, my body's sending me signals that I can learn to interpret and, use that information to know like when to expect my next period, as I was, older than the girls that of course we're talking about here, but I was able to use that information to, avoid getting pregnant and this kind of
Mhm.
stuff. And it was just one of the most empowering things that I ever did for myself. And it, awoken in within me a passion to share this information because I really feel like, if every young woman grew up knowing and understanding her body in this way, like it's life changing. And I'm sure you would agree, that you've made this your primary focus, celebrating menstruation and
Yeah.
helping women to live more in harmony with their cycles.
Oh, that's right, Robin. And like you say, to learn about your own fertility cycle is so empowering, whether you're using it for birth control or for trying to conceive or just for knowledge about your body. It's
hmm
so empowering to just know what your body's doing and what it wants, what it needs, the signals. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and like I was saying, it's like that first day of my period, like I would just like kind of shut down that day. I would do like all my little charts. I'd have like my little moon cycle chart. So I'd color in the days I was bleeding in red. And so then I could see like over the course of the year, like how my, cycles lined up with the moon and, and so I had like this whole little ritual that I would do at the beginning of each cycle, with menstruation being like day one of
Hmm.
cycle kind of thing. And yeah, it was awesome. And I have like years worth of records that I've kept. So it was really
Yeah, I do too. Looking back, yeah, there was a time when I was journaling, every daily journals, and
cool.
looking back at all the patterns of the month. And I love that you kept those records. And I love anything you can do to bring beauty to this experience of menstruation, and the fact that you did your little coloring, and the fact that you took a day off. Who says that there's the most value in just being busy all the time? There's so much value in stepping back and catching up with ourselves for anyone. And so all it is with menstruating women is that we have this optimal time. Our body brings us this optimal time that can become predictable, which is useful to know that there's this optimal time for stepping back, and we can plan for it. It doesn't have to be a big drag or a big surprise. And as you say, when we step back from our normal pace, we can be creative. We can be reflecting on our lives. We can do all sorts of things that just feel good. We can do nothing. That's a concept. We can give ourselves permission to do nothing. We've earned it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
So for moms who are maybe haven't had that conversation about menstruation with their girls yet, or maybe feeling a little bit uncomfortable, like what would you suggest to them? Like how can they start the conversation? What kinds of things might they say to help give them a little ideas, some guidance so that we're, not ignoring the conversation because we don't know what to say.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. My friend Michelle had a 10-year-old girl who's now, I think, 11, and her daughter had gotten a really bad attitude toward menstruation from things she had heard and seen, and just didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so that was a difficult kind of lead in for the conversation. And her mom wanted to try to shift that around. So we decided we would have tea and cookies once a month and just talk about this. And so I came over, and one of the first things we did was print out a calendar page that I have in my book, similar to like the ones you're talking about. We printed out calendar pages. We pasted them on larger pieces of paper, decorated the borders of them, and talked about the moon cycle. And then talked about how women's cycle is similar to the moon cycle. And because she had already heard this from her mom, it's just that she didn't want to have anything to do with it. So um, when we brought creativity to it, and the daughter drew a lot of cats during the time we were together. So she was illustrating this with cats and flowers, but all the concepts were being reinforced about the moon and the rhythm, the phases, how each phase of the month is different. We just reinforced this. I mean, during the year that we got together, we did a lot of review, just talking about the phases of the month and how each one is different. And I also recommend that, there's a couple different stages of this. Of course, you want to prepare your daughter beforehand with things that she might need.
Hmm.
And I suggest that you give her a little basket of things she might need. Talk about the menstrual products and give her some things that will be useful for her. What if it happens at school, that kind of thing. And the nicest book I have found, there's a little book from Glad Rags. Glad Rags makes cloth pads, and they've made a very nice little book for girls, which I recommend. Um, and then, so to let the girl know that you're creating this for her so she'll have what she needs. And the conversation beforehand, a lot of girls just simply want to know what's going to happen, how is it going to feel, what am I supposed to do. Another thing is be sure she knows it's going to happen more than once, because that's not necessarily understood. And I've heard of girls who had it happen again, they're like, what? So that's unfortunate. So um and then let her know that you're planning something special for her for when she does get her period. I had a girl, I was a mentor to a girl, and I let her know that I showed her the box. I had this pretty decorated box. I said, this is for you, and I'm filling this up with special things, and this is for your coming of age, like around the time of your first menstruation, because that's such an incredibly special threshold for you. And so I want to help you make that a special time. And so I'm going to be putting special things in here. And when the time is right, we will um, I will give this to you.
Hmm.
She did it, even though this is my thing, and I talked with her about it, not all the time, but several times, and she knew what I was so interested in this. So she didn't tell me when she got her first period, and so I just kind of figured that was the end of one school year when I figured, well, she's gotten her period by now. And so I just said, well, it's the end of the school year, summer's starting, so let's do this. I'm going to give you this box now, and this is a celebration for you. And so I had written a couple of cards for her. One was more about what I see in her, the qualities I see in her, how I envision her growing up into a woman. Another card was about the cycle, the value of the cycle, how each phase has value for her. And then I put some little things like maybe a stone shaped like the moon, and some magical things like little dolls. She likes dolls. So little dolls with, like fairies, and just anything to bring beauty and specialness to it, and so then I decorated the room with some pillows in a circle and scarves and the box in the middle. I made it very ceremonial. She couldn't come in until I was done. So it was very simple. It created a memory, which is what I wanted, So then we went in and sat with the box, and we really took our time looking at the cards and looking at everything. So anything like that is something that you can look forward to, and then also prepare her ahead of time with just more practical things.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Cool. And I think it's good, because I've heard stories of like girls as young as like 8 years old having like menstruation arriving at school, like they didn't know what was happening. It was really scary. Like they sat in the bathroom, like terrified, thinking they're dying, kind of thing. And so I think having like that practical hands-on, like, okay, here are your pads, here are your menstrual
Mhm.
cups, this is how you use them, this type of thing, I think is really is good.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really important. And another thing that I think can trip some parents up is that they think that they need to have a conversation about sex when they have a conversation about menstruation, because they kind of go together. It's the cycle of fertility, but
Sure.
that again is overwhelming, and it's just another thing that would make that conversation harder. And So I encourage parents to just take it simple, and menstruation itself is a huge event and a huge topic that deserves its own conversation. And then you can have separate conversations about sex, so you don't have to try to do all of that at once.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because I mean, the more overwhelmed, you feel as a parent, the harder it's going to be, the more angsty you're going to feel,
Yes.
and this kind of thing. And just thinking, it's like, okay, all I need to do, the piece I'm going to do today is this. I'm going to teach her about menstrual pads, and I'm going
Mhm.
to teach her about her cycle, and we're going to have this conversation. And it's like, so yeah, breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, and kids can only absorb so much at one time.
Right. You can't just like dump all this information. You're going to have to talk about it all again anyway. So
Right. Yeah.
small steps. Yeah, and to talk about the biological thing, a really simple thing is just to tell children that your uterus is where a baby would grow if you ever were to become pregnant, and that the uterus, every month it develops this soft cushiony little sort of like a comforter inside, like very soft little cushion. In case you were ever pregnant, the baby would grow there in a nice comfortable place. And but usually you're not going to be pregnant, and you may never be pregnant. So in all the months that you're not, then that flows out so that a new fresh one can form every month. That's just how the cycle works, and that's a really simple way to describe it. And then how you might get pregnant might not be a question for them at that point, or it could be in another conversation.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's helpful for kids to kind of have like the visual, like, because I know, for example, you know, the textbooks at school, they have the uterus, the vagina, and the ovaries just kind of floating in outer space, and it's kind of hard to like visualize, like, where is this in me? Like, where does this live? Kind of thing. And so I think, like the picture books that are out there, there's so many really great books these days that help to like can give you the visuals to help do some of the explanation too. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And how about your book? Does your book have like those diagrams in them too?
No.
No? Okay. I wasn't sure if they did or not. It's been a
Simple.
while since I looked at it. Yes.
Yeah, but I'll tell you about the book. The book, this is like my central message to the world is this the fact of the cycle and how it's beneficial for women. And so that's why, as I said, the first chapter is about what is a cycle, and then the second chapter is about your inner life, paying attention to the emotions that might come up at certain times of month, paying attention to that second half of the month that is more difficult in modern culture is really what that's all about. And then the third chapter is about how to support our body, nutrition, environment, things like that. The fourth chapter is about culture and the messages we get, the beliefs that we form because of the cultural messages, and how profound that is, what a difference that makes, what we learn from the culture, right?
hmm
And it also talks about former cultures and how different those beliefs have been in times past.
hmm So
And
I'm
then,
curious. Yeah, actually, I'm curious about what some of the beliefs for other cultures are or have been, just to kind of give people a different perspective, because I mean, I think we're mostly familiar with how menstruation is portrayed here in the United States in general. So I think it'd be helpful for people to have kind of a different view of how we could look at menstruation.
well, there's a fascinating book called The Women's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets by Barbara Walker. And it's a big book. It's an encyclopedia. And the two biggest entries in that book are about the moon and about the menstrual cycle, because there's so much information. And you can just read through there all of these um, views from long ago about the menstrual cycle. And when you go far enough back in history, all the views toward the menstrual cycle are positive. So that's just a great thing to know.
hmm
And the menstrual cycle originally was seen to be kind of like a calendar and sort of a timekeeping thing, and that menstrual blood was associated with power and life force, things like that. And so it was all very positive. And also, along with being positive, it was more just a natural part of community life. It wasn't hidden. And something else I understood was, and so I'm talking about, like, I think maybe the last 5,000 years have been more like what they call modern history or recorded history. And I understand that maybe 200,000 years before that was this much longer span of history where these concepts were more, and cultures were closer to nature,
Hmm.
understanding the rhythms of nature, therefore understanding more the rhythms of women. So it kind of all goes together.
Right. Hmm.
And then I was about to say something else, which now I don't remember.
Mhm. Well, and I mean, as you're talking about, the older cultures and menstruation and that sort of thing too, it makes me think about like the oral traditions that were handed down over time, because clearly this is before things were written, and it reminds me of, like, say, the herbal remedies that were passed from mother to daughter. Not that, I mean, I have no idea if they had menstrual cramps back then. Maybe things were different, and they
Yeah.
have no idea. But
Hmm.
for things to aid with childbirth or to ease menstruation or this kind of thing. And there's I mean, there were just so many resources and plants available to help with those kinds of things. And
Yeah.
so I love just the whole oral tradition, like
Hmm.
that
Yes,
kind of goes along with like the mother daughter handing down of information.
that's it. And I talk to people who come from different countries who say, well, in Thailand or where I come from, we don't put teenage girls on the pill. We teach them about their bodies. And so those traditions still continue there. And I learned about Native American practices that have, there's a Native American approach toward life in general that traditionally has been very respectful toward many aspects of life. And I eventually realized that that respect actually extended to the menstrual cycle, which was pretty cool. And I read many things by Brooke Medicine Eagle. In fact, she had cassette tapes years ago that were so valuable to me. One of them was all about, I think it was called Moontime, and it was all about the menstrual cycle and how women would take themselves to the moon lodge during their menstrual time, that women might be more likely to be menstruating together with each other because there was no artificial light. The moon was
Mhm.
the light at night, and so sometimes it would be dark, sometimes it would be full. And so the idea was that women would menstruate around the dark of the moon and go to the moon lodge and have this time to catch up with themselves, and that it wasn't a banishment or being seen as unclean, not originally, and that it was something women created for themselves as a valuable time. And that's what I understood. I've heard this from men in Native American culture as well. I'm not firsthand, but secondhand, that they would say, you are holding, as menstruating women, you are holding the state of consciousness that others are trying to get to through prayer and meditation, because it's this state of consciousness where everything is connected, which is like we're trying to get to through prayer and meditation. And that's one of the reasons that this became so important for me, was because I felt that, and I would feel that state, that change of consciousness just wash over me and land in me a few days before my menstrual time. And I used to think of it as just being spaced out or lazy or tired. And I realized, whoa, this is a different state of consciousness. And it's something that you want to value rather than just distract yourself away from for your whole life. Because it's a spiritual time. And that's the other thing that I learned from Brooke Medicine Eagle, is that the Native American, the traditions that she was familiar with, and I think this was very widespread, would say that this menstrual time is when the veil between the worlds is thinnest. That's the time when you can receive inspiration and guidance from your inner sources, but it's a lot easier if you're not all distracted.
Absolutely, yeah. Definitely. It's easier, I think, to tap into like the sources of intuition and that kind of stuff during and around the time of menstruation, and especially if you kind of cultivate that too.
Yes, and that's the thing, is to give ourselves permission to slow down, because this is valuable. Our culture doesn't recognize it as valuable, but it is valuable. So,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
It's a real gift, and people don't see that. Like, I've always felt like it's like we have, as women, we have all this creative energy within us, and we can use that energy to birth babies, to bring projects into the world, all these kinds of things. And so I think really, honoring that piece of us that is fertile and, that cycles and goes through all these different, changes every cycle, I think is really powerful. So yeah.
Yeah,
I
because I mean, the more you tune into it, the more you can learn. It's just you'll learn about your own creativity cycle, as you say. Like there's times when you're kind of ready with new energy, and there's times to manifest, like around your ovulation time. You might find everybody's different, but you might find that your projects can kind of manifest more around your ovulation time, and then there's this time of completion, and then there's this time of pause, and that's that can be used for any kind of creativity, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And like what you were saying too, during ovulation, we are more likely to have that outward going energy type thing.
Mhm.
And so it's easier for us to show up in the world and share our projects and that kind of thing. And then, during the more quiet times of our cycle, during menstruation and such, pulling back in and nurturing that creative energy within, and like you said, taking care of ourselves. And I think it's a powerful way, especially if we were able to, help girls tap into that at a younger age so that they can kind of like live more in harmony with their cycles rather than ignoring it or, trying to fight against it or suppress it.
Oh, I was here, I was talking to somebody the other day who was saying that there's this pre and perinatal psychology, and they're talking about the womb, even preconception, and that
Mhm.
ignoring the womb is thought to affect fertility, which of course it makes sense. Like if you ignore your body, it's going to affect your body. And my slight angle on that is that ignoring and resenting your menstrual cycle all your life is going to affect fertility. Just for example, like if your daughter ever does want to become pregnant, it's going to be maybe a lot less stressful if she has cultivated a healthy relationship with her own menstrual cycle. Because I think if we ignore and resent and try to suppress our cycles our entire life, and then when we're trying to get pregnant, we hate to see our menstrual period because it means we're not pregnant. We've never had the opportunity to just enjoy our body as it is.
Yeah, and actually, you make a point about, that sense of disappointment when the menstruation arrives kind of thing. And one of the gifts that I got from learning how to use the symptoms and the signals that my body was sending me to avoid getting pregnant was the sense of accomplishment each month when my period arrived on schedule. I'll be like, yes, it's like I not only tracked my symptoms, but I interpreted them correctly and, applied that information. And now, not only did I avoid getting pregnant, but now when my period is showing up when I think it should, because I interpreted that information correctly.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's such a sense of accomplishment, and I would play around with it, because I'm kind of nerdy and geeky like that. Like, I would try to like narrow down my window of ovulation to like try to pinpoint it within like 12 hours or so, and it
Right.
was fun. It was a challenge, I
Listening with all your senses, right?
yeah, it was so fun, and you have these different tools that you can use. I mean,
Yeah.
and just really like having mastery of that. I had, 25 some odd years to do this, because I, learned this in my teen, or well, my late teens, my early 20s. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it's just been just like this amazing, incredible experience. And I would love every young woman to like grow up and know and understand and her cycle to that level so that she could, you don't have to rely on birth control pills, or if you and your partner, and we're not having the safe sex conversation here, but that's always in the back of my mind. But like say you're in a monogamous relationship, and you don't want to use condoms and that kind of thing, and you can have access to this information that your body is sending you and apply it, you know, in your sex life to determine whether or not you want to have a baby right now, this cycle or not,
Mhm. Yeah.
hmm
There's so many ways you can apply this. And another really valuable thing is just for women to realize that we need time alone. And that's one of the big things around the menstrual time that women crave, but we don't recognize the need. Or if we do, we think, well, how's that going to happen with all
Yeah,
that
busy.
yeah. And to recognize that need and then to start honoring it even in small ways, then that possibility will start to grow. Because you were mentioning that we might be much more social at full moon and we might be much less social at other times of month. So to anticipate, learn about our cycle in all these different ways, it just sets a girl up for a lifetime of emotional health, physical health, social health. It's just, it affects every area of our life. As you know, I had a private client recently who, within a few weeks of working with me, her relationship with her husband was so much better.
Mm.
Just from this, of her showing him her cycle, like, well, this is my cycle, it's kind of like the seasons, and it just gave a different flavor to their conversation. She said it even changed their arguments to where their arguments were more friendly, and it just, there was just a much more understanding between them. It's so wonderful.
Yeah, and that the point of bringing her husband into the conversation and you know educating him at least a little bit about her cycle is kind of something I think I've maybe taken for granted, being that you know I have used these natural ways of tracking my cycle and maneuvering my fertility, so that also made it so that I had to communicate with my partners, as far as like, okay, no ejaculation because
Mhm.
we don't want to get pregnant, this kind of thing. And so we're having that conversation about sex, and he has a deeper understanding of where I am in my cycle. And if we were to educate men about how our moods can kind of ebb and flow during that cycle, I think it may make it easier for them to relate to us, because instead of being like, oh, she's on the rag, she's crazy, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And so
Men haven't been taught how to support us with the menstrual cycle because we haven't been taught either. We think of it as a big kind of draining, unfortunate thing we have to put up with. And so that's how men tend to think of it. So if we can show them this supportive, positive way to approach it, then they know much more how to be helpful and what to do.
So on that note, since we do have a parent, this is all about parents. I know we have, moms of sons here too. So what can moms with boys teach them about menstruation that will help them grow up, being more, you know, conscious, considerate, empathetic, in tune with, women and their cycles?
Gosh, that's a good question. I would think just a lot of the things that we've talked about today, in terms of that it's a natural rhythm, it's a rhythm of nature, it's predictable, it has different phases, and these are actually there to help a woman. But you can't expect a woman to, our culture, I mean, that's such a huge conversation, because how the culture acclimates boys and then girls and what we expect of them, and that our culture expects women to be agreeable and available all the time. And that's just not sustainable. That's not how people are. And everybody needs their downtime. The thing about a menstrual rhythm is that we know when the optimal downtime is. And so that we can expect girls and women to not be so social at certain times of month, not be so available. They're going to need time alone. And then other times of the month, they're going to be very social. So if we can just learn that as a natural rhythm, and again, it's like the seasons, draw it out. I tell women, draw it, put it on the refrigerator, or like the mom of the sun, draw your cycle, put it on the refrigerator. This is seasons of the month. And to make it such a natural rhythm that's predictable. And what was I going to say? I forget the other thing I was going to say. Maybe it'll come back to me. Yeah, but that's such a good question, because boys want to know and men want to know, but we just need to share with them what we're learning.
Yeah, and I think that will help to kind of break the whole taboo around
Yeah.
menstruation and the secretiveness, is to help, bring boys, men into that conversation and give them a greater understanding of the female body. Because, I've met so many moms who are like, oh, I have boys, they're so easy, kind of thing. And it's like, it seems like an excuse to not have some of
Yeah.
these conversations. And
Mhm.
we've seen the devastation that comes from not having these conversations. I mean, there are lives being ruined, because of poor choices being made, not good communication, alcohol influence, this kind of thing. And so I
Mhm.
think having those conversations with our boys will help to deepen the appreciation and, the understanding between the two sexes.
Yeah, and to understand that for boys to understand that the menstrual cycle is really profound and really affects a woman's body. Just for example, like there's times of the month, some months more than others, when her breasts may be really tender. She may not want them touched, and that's real. She's not just being picky. I mean, I read about that one time, that a woman's husband didn't understand why she didn't want to be touched sometimes. Well, it's because she feels different right now, but he just didn't have a concept of that as something important. So all of this education is there's a lot of levels to it.
There absolutely is, absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit, well, before we go there, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would want to share with parents before we, wrap up and tell them about your free gift?
Oh, let's see. I think we've covered a lot of it. I made a note that I was listening to your guest Mercedes this morning, and she was talking about parents don't get the space they need to be good parents, and I thought that's what I think about with this too. That menstruating women need space in order to just maintain their overall health in life, and that's something we don't acknowledge. So I appreciated her saying that the way she did.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's where I think the concept of like the Moon Lodge or the more modern day red tent movement is to help give and create, those sacred spaces for women to go and, menstruate and communicate, spend time with other women, women of all ages, and learn from each other. So,
and you can, that I talked about creating a box to give girls when they get their first period. Well, the idea there is that she'll bring that box out every month, like for the rest of her life, to make her period special. And that's what I encourage women to do for themselves too, is to create something special for yourself that you only bring out when your period starts every month. Start giving this quality of specialness to menstruation, so it's not just something to dread, but believe it or not, it can actually become something to look forward to.
Yeah, I have a great relationship with, my reproductive system, my period, my cervix, all that stuff. And it's been just so empowering for me personally. And, empowerment is one of my highest values. And so I just naturally want to share that with other women. So thank you so much, Barbara, for being with us today, because I know that you also share that passion too. So
yes. That's right. To love all aspects of ourselves and really step into this. So that, some people call it body literacy, like understanding how to read your own body, right? It's just so empowering.
Yeah, definitely. So can you tell us a little bit about your free gift that you're offering to everybody?
My free gift is the PDF of my booklet. I wrote my booklet before I wrote my book. It's called How to Celebrate Your Daughter's Coming of Age in 90 Caring, Creative, and Practical Ways. I think that's the entire title. And it's a tips booklet. So it's small, it's tall and narrow. It fits into a business envelope, and but it's also available as a PDF. So I'm giving that as a gift. And the 90 tips, they just cover everything from possible gifts, conversations, projects, and also things mom can do for herself. It's mostly, again, about moms, but I appreciate any dads that are stepping in there, because they'll find a lot value in this also, of things they can do with their daughter. And things about health, things about nature and the moon. So there's all these tips in the booklet.
Nice. Sounds wonderful. Sounds like a great resource. So lots of things to choose from, lots of ideas to help celebrate your daughter's first period.
Yeah.
If you missed the first period, just go celebrate.
Well, that's it. You're celebrating your daughter's new maturity, even if you missed the first period. That's right.
Exactly. Coming of age, her stepping into womanhood. And there's so much that we get to teach her at that time. So
there is. And the projects are things like just to research something or to do something challenging she's never done before. And the 10-year-old that I talked about, she did get her period, and she recently went to on her own to Belgium to spend a month with her aunt.
Oh, wow.
This alone is a huge passage, right? So when she gets back, her mom and I are planning on doing something a little special for her, but it's just nice that that itself is its own passage. It's a
Absolutely.
new maturity, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's wonderful to watch these young ladies become, you know, grow into their womanhood. So
I
yeah.
wanted to say one more thing about her because
Yeah.
when she got her period, she threw a fit. I think she had a 4-hour fit. Um, she definitely told her parents about it. It's like, no! But then after that, they brought out the things that her mother had collected for her. And she had, because during the year that we had tea and cookies together, she made a crown for herself. So there's this photograph of her on that day wearing her crown with this special red shawl that her mom had given her with these things in front of her. So she was prepared to acknowledge the day, even though she didn't really welcome it. So that was so special to see that.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. It's really it's needed. So thank you. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you, Robin. This has been so great. Thank you so much.
Yes, it's my pleasure. I want to thank you for joining us today. Coming up tomorrow, we have two very special guests. First, we have Susan Berlin, who is going to be talking about how to support kids, either in your community or in your own family, who are coming out as gay, lesbian, transgender, or somewhere in between, and how you can navigate those tricky waters. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation. And also coming up, we have Anya Menes, and she is going to be talking about peer pressure and how you can empower your kids to resist peer pressure. So, two really great conversations, and I'm really looking forward to those. And I have a couple announcements to make. First, I'm going to do a live Q&A call on Sunday morning. That will be the 23rd of September at 10 a.m. Pacific. And I just want to get together and meet some of you. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask them. And I would really love to hear, like, what were some of your biggest takeaways from the interviews that we did. And I'm curious to know, what you would like to hear more about. I have interest in doing more interviews in the future. So you're invited to a live Q&A call on Sunday with me, and I don't know, I might invite some other of the speakers to join me too if they want to. So that will be fun. And also, if you would like to get the recordings, Friday is going to be the last day that you can get them for $97. So our summit special will end on Friday, and the recordings will be the full price, which is $197. So if you want to add the recordings to your library, I recommend upgrading today so that you can take advantage of our summit price. Yeah, we have more really fantastic interviews coming up. This week, we're going to be talking about some of my favorite topics along the line of sex and keeping your kids safe and all that really fun, interesting, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. So I'm really looking forward to all of that. And I hope that you'll join me. So I will see you tomorrow for our conversation with Susan Berlin and Anya Menes. So really great conversations. Don't miss them. And we'll see you tomorrow.